Welcome to this episode of More Influence and Impact, where we are joined by Brendan Aylward, founder of an inclusive fitness center and AdaptX. Through this enlightening conversation with Brendan, you're going to gain insight into building a business centered around inclusivity. Brendan's unique perspective will challenge your assumptions and provide actionable strategies for integrating a more diverse audience into your business. So let me welcome up Brendan. Hello, Brendan.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So excited for you to be here. So I'm going to just do another quick intro in your bio. And so you're the owner of Unified Health and Performance and executive director of AdaptX, which specializes in training clients with disabilities. And then since 2014, Brendan has been a Team Hoyt New England member and alongside his partner, Jacob, has finished nearly 100 races. So you're also, or is that running?
Yep, that's duo running. So we just qualified for the Boston Marathon. So in about 4 weeks, we'll run the Boston Marathon as one of the 12 wheelchair duos. Yep.
So cool. That is
Yeah.
awesome. That is
Yep.
awesome. So how many years have you been in racing? No, you said since 2014 or
Yeah,
longer?
since about 2014. Yep. So to qualify for Boston, both participants have to be 18, and Jacob just turned 18 about a year ago. So we tried to run that qualifying standard a few times, and finally we're able to last May, which is under 3 hours. So now that gives us the opportunity to run this April. So looking forward.
Congratulations. That is so exciting.
Thanks.
So give us a little background on your journey, how you got into what you do, that high level, because we always like to hear the backstory, the origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to make it as concise as possible and kind of weave the two companies together. But
Sure.
I was introduced to Special Olympics when I was 15 and was immediately drawn to that environment and the mission of that as a whole. So I decided during university that I wanted to open a gym for my Special Olympics athletes to train alongside their peers. So I was also working with some hockey and basketball, I guess you could call them neurotypical athletes, over at the high school as well. And I just wanted to create an environment where they could seamlessly coexist. And there wasn't really a model to follow. I wasn't too familiar with other strength and conditioning sports performance facilities that operated in that way. So kind of had to take the dive into opening my own. And so I did so when I was 23, about a year after graduating college. And 3 or 4 years into that journey, we started making some educational resources to hopefully help other gyms become more inclusive. And that's what morphed into AdaptX. So now AdaptX is our nonprofit branch. It's more educational and research focused. So we teach a course to health and fitness professionals around the country on how to create more accessible environments and more effectively train people with intellectual and physical disabilities. And so they're synergistic in many ways. The content that we develop for AdaptX often comes from the influence that we have at the gym, our brick and mortar facility here in Massachusetts. So that's kind of been now the mission's just to create as many environments as possible that support people with disabilities in the fitness space.
And so it sounds like you've always been into fitness for most of your life.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe picking up more stuff in the gym later on in high school. I was more so into athletics and sports up until that point, and
Okay.
then the transition into running and weightlifting kind of maybe started in high school and college.
Okay. And then did you get your degree in like exercise physiology or personal training or?
Yeah, so I started and finished in special education. So initially, I thought
Oh, okay.
I thought I might want to be a teacher. Ultimately, back maybe at the high school that I went to teach the Special Olympic athletes that I was working with. But then decided about halfway through university that I wanted to do something slightly different.
Okay.
So still education to a degree. Coaching is very similar in many ways to education, but wanted to do something outside of the classroom that was a little more active and had a little more flexibility in terms of how we interacted and the relationships that we had with the kids. So, the last couple of years of school, I finished up my special ed degree. I got several personal training certifications, took some anatomies and some exercise science types of courses, but it would have extended my university stay to switch majors at that point. So I finished with my special education and mathematics degrees, and was on my way, got my certifications, and was garnering as much experience as possible. And then when I opened a facility, I had 50 clients to start because I kind of had already built up a little bit of a community and was able to grow it from there.
Wow. And so now at your gym, do you exclusively cater to athletes and individuals with disabilities, or do you have neurotypical people there as well?
Yeah, we have general pop as well.
Okay.
So we have about 300 members, maybe 75 of which are your general pop
Okay.
adults, maybe 150 middle school, high school, collegiate athletes, and then another 50 or 60 with intellectual and physical disabilities. So
Okay.
kind of an even. It's a diverse group, which keeps it exciting and is also necessary for executing that mission of authentic inclusion where people with and without disabilities exist. So
Yeah, yeah. And so about your gym and like your setup, kind of tell us about like, do you have special equipment there? Is it like sort of do you have to order from special companies, and like what does that look like in terms of like, filling your gym and all of those things?
yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And I think it lends its hand a little bit to one of the misconceptions that I think some people have about inclusion and accessibility is
Okay.
that you need some of those highly individualized, highly complex pieces of equipment. And I think gym owners, and I can speak on kind of the behalf of both populations. So someone that
Uh-huh.
owns a gym that they want to be profitable and sustainable, but also someone who's strongly advocating for inclusion. In that like you don't necessarily want to buy a $5,000 piece of equipment that's only used by one client. So I
Mhm.
understand. I think some people have that vision of accessibility being completely retrofitting their facility, that it's highly expensive. But if you were to walk into our gym, it looks just like really kind of any other sports performance or CrossFit type of facility where it's predominantly free weights. It's a lot of open floor space, which is necessary to adhere to ADA standards and make sure that people in wheelchairs can easily navigate the gym. When you kind of pack in a lot of pieces of equipment, it becomes harder to navigate the facility when we have clients who have visual impairments and clients who might lack some peripheral vision and kind of awareness of their surroundings. So that open floor space is really critical to delivering an inclusive and accessible experience. And it's also more affordable, right? So coming up with creative ways to use the equipment that we have for people who have mobility impairments and disabilities, as opposed to completely overhauling a previous facility. So that's what our course kind of teaches you how to take what you have and
Okay.
modify it and adapt it to the populations that you want to serve, without having to invest tens of thousands of dollars in all this equipment. So
Okay. Wow. Wow. So kind of taking what you already have and then being able to modify it.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then, so tell us about like your marketing strategy for specifically for the gym. Like, do you need to do a lot of marketing, or do you get a lot of word of mouth referrals?
Yeah, we haven't spent any money on marketing in the 8 years that we've been running. Most of it has come from, well, I guess unless you consider like sponsoring local community events and having a presence at
Mhm.
things like those. I guess that would probably fit into the marketing criteria. But we haven't run social media campaigns or anything. It's predominantly word of mouth, organic social media content that we produce, and then just kids that mention it to their friends and
Mhm.
all that process and the special populations and the adaptive athletes. That community is pretty closely knit, so I think they run in a lot of similar circles. So they might mention to another parent like, hey, my son's going to this facility. And obviously, since it's a little unique, there's not a lot of gyms that cater to people with disabilities. It's a
Mhm.
good way to differentiate yourselves and attract populations that other businesses aren't serving. So
Mhm. So earlier you touched on one of the misconceptions that gym owners might have about having an accessible gym. Let's talk about some of the misconceptions that you run into around business owners in adapting accessibility in their business in general. Like what are some of those things that you come across?
yeah, absolutely. I think some people associate inclusion with charity, so they assume that if they're going to support people with disabilities, that they have to do so pro bono or they have to make
Mhm.
some sacrifice in order to do so. Obviously, there's socioeconomic considerations, and depending on where you are, we're in a relatively affluent area where a lot of our young adults with disabilities are still supported by their parents, so that
Mhm.
helps them be able to afford a gym membership. And I recognize that's not the case everywhere, but you shouldn't necessarily make the assumption that people with disabilities can't afford services. And from like a business owner standpoint, you can have the best intentions, and you can want to support people with disabilities, but ultimately, if it's not economically sustainable, then it's not going to last, right? So we want to make sure that our program exists for our young adults with disabilities, our kids with disabilities forever. And the only way to do so is to run a profitable and sustainable business. So
Right.
we need to make sure that it fits within our model. But I think some people associate disability inclusion, like I mentioned, with that charitable act. And in
Mhm.
doing so, it has some unintended consequences, like it marginalizes people with disabilities by kind of
Mhm.
implying that it's a lesser service, or it kind of puts you in this volunteer and client role as opposed to like an equal peer relationship. So I think one thing that we just try to demonstrate is that, like, the value proposition of inclusion, you're opening yourself up to a market that a lot of people aren't serving. It's considered the largest growing minority in the world, so their
Mhm.
disposable income is pretty on par with some populations like the Latino population. So I think some people see it as, I don't think people really recognize it as a marketable market, I guess,
Mhm.
population to market to. Whereas I think the statistics, I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but um, 3/4 of people are more likely to buy a product that demonstrates inclusion in their representation of their marketing, whether they have a disability or not. So I think a
Mhm.
lot of people like care about that as a cause. And when you can
Mhm.
build a brand or a product around a cause that people care about, they're more likely to be consumers and uh, consistent consumers, I suppose.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really insightful. And so tell me about the evolution of the nonprofit. Like, what specifically led to you forming that?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned initially, it was kind of just our way of creating some resources in house to bring our interns up to speed, to develop our coaches, continuing education resources for our
Mhm.
coaches. And I found that one of the best ways for me to learn was to uh, put it together as if I was going to teach it. So I
Mhm.
was learning about a disability, and I wanted to create a little module on fitness applications for someone with multiple sclerosis or spina bifida or these various conditions. And then it just kind of kept growing to the point where it was a significant enough curriculum that we thought other people could benefit from it. So I think the initial intention was not for it to be a paid product, but pretty soon it became apparent that it was something that other people wanted and other people needed. And if our ultimate mission was to create as many environments as possible for people with disabilities to train, then we couldn't do so exclusively in our small town in Massachusetts here. So AdaptX became our way to have like a small impact, or play a little bit of a role in facilities all around the country becoming more inclusive and accessible. So I feel really passionately and strongly about that. And we incorporated it as a nonprofit because the mission is very cohesive with a lot of like grant funding.
Okay.
And again, it's a cause that a lot of people care about. So we have like a local 5K in a couple months that we'll be hosting, which is our predominant fundraising event throughout the year. And it's just, I guess I'm fortunate that my gym subsidizes my lifestyle and I'm able to work on AdaptX almost full time without any compensation. And so being a nonprofit doesn't necessarily mean you can't make money, but it does
Sure.
mean that you can disseminate it. And I feel like I want to grow a staff and add a marketing. We had talked about last week that we're in the process of trying to grow out our digital marketing team. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the next step for AdaptX, is to reach more people by growing out that marketing department.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like you have, your current business that funds you, and then, you're able to fund, the growth of the nonprofit, and then also
Yeah,
open up for funding through grants and things like that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
that's excellent, and especially seeing that there is a need across the country that other are you is it specifically gym owners that are it sounds like it's a curriculum for gym owners in particular?
Yeah, gym owners, personal trainers. We've had
Okay.
physical therapists and occupational therapists take it, but yeah, personal trainers, strength and conditioning coaches. We work with a lot of YMCA's, so they'll
Okay.
have their personal trainers take the course. We work with some universities; they'll have some of their graduating, like exercise science students, take the course as well. So yeah.
Fantastic. So do you have a mission in terms of we want to impact, this many facilities across the world? Have you put that into place?
Yeah, I haven't quantified that.
Okay.
I'm very, how should I articulate that? I'm very, like not necessarily outcome driven, but like I like working on things instead
Yeah.
of like looking ahead to what it could be. And I think like it's something I was talking to a colleague about the other day where I was kind of refining my gym's mission statement. And when I've worked with consultants in the past, they love talking about mission statements and vision
Uh-huh.
statements. But the mission statement for Unified, our gym that I would have put together 8 years ago, is drastically different than the mission statement I would put together today, because that's like it depends on your experiences, and obviously your experiences change over the year, your understanding changes over the year. So I guess all of that to say that I anticipate things will continue to evolve and change. Hopefully we've had about maybe a little under 300 people take the course, and that's without any paid media or
Mhm.
marketing, and without any marketing team really. So I'm hoping we're able to that number grows exponentially over the next 2 or 3 years. But we haven't put a cap on how many people we hope to serve. I just hope it's one more at a time.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, change one life at a
mhm,
time,
mhm.
I agree. And so what are, in growing your business, like, have you run any obstacles or challenges, specifically around having an inclusive business? Have there been any things that you've come up against that you've had to work through?
Yeah, no, I don't know if there's any specific ones that stand out. I
Mhm,
think, I mean, there's things that we haven't done perfectly. I think that's
mhm,
one thing. People get worried that they're going to make a mistake, and so they don't
mhm,
even bother to go down this quote unquote rabbit hole of inclusion and accessibility. Like, they're worried that if they claim to be accessible, then that's going to open them up to criticism when you're inevitably not. And accessibility is really ever evolving, and it's
mhm,
very context dependent. You can be accessible for one person but not accessible for another. um, we did a podcast episode with Brad McCannell from the Rick Hansen Foundation, and they're an organization that assists with a lot of big construction projects on the accessibility. And he talked about how they did an airport up in Canada, and they added a strip of carpet down the middle of the airport to make it easier for people with hearing impairments, because it kind of reduces some of the sound. But at the
mhm,
same time, it made it inaccessible for wheelchair users because it's harder to propel your chair on carpet. So
mhm,
sometimes you can design for one disability and it has a negative effect on another. So I think that whole, like, the ambiguity of it sometimes concerns people. But we've found that when you have people's best intention in mind, and when you're reactive to their concerns, and when you genuinely listen to their needs, everyone is receptive to kind of figuring out a solution together. So
mhm,
our old building wasn't necessarily wheelchair accessible. We would have to open doors for people, but it was just that assumption that, like, we might have to open the door for you, but once you get in here, we're going to provide the best service that we can. And
mhm,
sometimes just having a wheelchair ramp or having an automatic opening door, that doesn't make you accessible. If you can get into the building, you still need to be able to experience everything that the business has to offer. So accessibility is really multidimensional. It's ever evolving and context dependent, like I mentioned. So I can't think of one like interaction, but
mhm,
I guess the main challenge is, like, obviously COVID was weird for a brick and mortar gym.
mhm,
That was obviously pretty rocky. And then this next step of figuring out how we approach the social media marketing and the campaigns, and how much we invest in it, and figuring out what that ROI is going to be. I
mhm.
anticipate that being the next challenge that we're going to try to tackle.
Yeah, yeah, especially in the scaling and reaching more people. And yeah, that's it's really insightful too in terms of the, accessibility and how it, you can cater to one group and then, it doesn't work for another. So, that's probably something always to keep in mind. And what you were saying about listening to your clients' needs, that's something that every business owner needs to be doing. And, you happen to have a business that requires more of you to do that. But I find that a lot of business owners in general just aren't. They kind of have an idea, they go and they run with it, but they're not really listening to their clients' needs. And to me, that's where innovation happens. So you've created a really innovative business, by doing the things that cause innovation to happen. And so it's great that you are, you spreading the word about how to incorporate that into your gym. Do people ever ask you about how to grow their business and ask you for more of like the business style coaching and input?
Yeah, I'll have some conversations with people after they take our course who mention like, hey, maybe I want to open my own facility. We're releasing a free course next month on building an inclusive fitness business specifically. So that's more so geared towards like exactly the gym owner or that aspiring fitness professional who wants to own their own facility. And it really goes into the nuts and bolts of some of the misconceptions of inclusion and accessibility, some standards of accessibility, metrics and benchmarks that you might be looking at from a pricing standpoint and a customer retention standpoint, as well as accessible marketing. That's something that myself and Bridget, one of my creative director, have been working on a lot of trying to figure out is how to make social media content more accessible, how to make our websites more accessible, the material that we put out more accessible. So digital accessibility is another thing that is becoming more popular, at least in my space, that I think some people should be more aware of, especially if they're growing an e-commerce business or they're growing an online business, is the accessibility of their website and their online product.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So you're getting a whole other education into that, into, having the digital accessibility. Excellent. Well, great. Are there any final words or thoughts that you'd like to share, Brendan, and where we can direct people to connect with you further and learn more about your company?
Yeah, no, I think some of the stuff that we mentioned at the beginning, how inclusion is a beneficial business decision. It's not just altruistic. It doesn't have to be sacrificial or charitable. It can be a part of really any business model. And you'll open yourself up to a consumer base that a lot of people aren't really competing for. So it's a good way to differentiate yourself as a business if people are looking to stand out. And it just demonstrates that you care about people, which is always good. But yeah, we're most active on Instagram and our webpage. So adaptx.org is our webpage. And then on Instagram, we're adaptx.coach. So that's a lot of our resources that are kind of fitness specific, but there is definitely some overlap. And then our podcast, the AdaptX podcast as well, where we have conversations with people who are building inclusive businesses or participating in adaptive sports. So that's a good way, sharing some insights and lived experiences from people with disabilities themselves to hopefully help business owners create more accessible environments. So yeah, so our podcast, our Instagram, and our website is probably the best three places to find us.
All right. We will have those in the show notes for everybody to come check you out. Well, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. It was a wonderful conversation. And thank you to all of the listeners and viewers for tuning in to More Influence and Impact. Until next time, bye.